Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about racism and some kinds of new thoughts that I've come to by virtue of sort of witnessing and now researching mass hysteria since COVID started, which has sort of been where my research is veering at FreeX, the Free Expression Group is veering into trying to understand these kinds of social narratives and mass hysterias and totalitarianisms and these kinds of group forces. Now I've talked about in previous Science Moment, I've talked about sort of how perceptual illusions encourage racism. There's a lot of kinds of biases that humans are born with that make it harder, make in some sense lead us to be almost inclined to be racist. I've mentioned these before. For example, once you adapt to whatever baseline color skin is around you, then far away skin colors just all appear, roughly speaking, the same skin color. But all the skin colors near the tone that you're used to looking at can suddenly seem extremely diverse. Same for the actual look of the face, sounds for your accents and so forth. The taste of spit tastes like nothing, so that you can experience very subtle modulations around it. These sorts of things, though, when you want to be really good at recognizing small differences from the baseline things in your life, for whatever your ethnicity or the people typically around you, well, that makes you really good at distinguishing within that, but it also makes you really bad at making distinctions for things that are far from that part of the stimulus space. And so you're inclined to say, they're all the same. That's all the same, and it feels like it really is the same. And if you can't counteract these biases, you might actually think that. Now, today I'm not really wanting to talk about individual biases, but the kinds of things that I'm working on now are more social, societal, kinds of psychosocietal biases, the kinds of effects that happen in large groups that can lead to, in this case, in terms of making racism worse. So, individually, even if I was all by myself outside of a group, you could imagine I might be inclined to have racist thoughts by virtue of these biases, and maybe I could overcome them. But the question is, what other further things happen when there's groups involved? And as we've been talking, and I don't have it fully worked out, but it strikes me, a lot of the things that we've been talking about in regards to virtue signals, the reason that when we pick virtue signals, like a face mask or any kind of a signal, it has to be either rather arbitrary so that it has to serve as a badge of membership in our group. And if it was just something anybody would wear, like a hat, well, that's not going to work because if it's cold outside, even people that are not in our righteous group might wear the hat. So it's going to have to be either extremely random or even sometimes better, slightly harmful. Like no one's, it's really, you're not going to do it unless you really want to be showing membership in this righteous group. Now there are other kinds of signals of membership that you don't even have to choose to have a particular signal or even make it difficult or painful or having to suffer through something. It's just merely looking like the people do in that group. So if it's an ethnic thing, as opposed to religious or class related or things like this. If it's ethnic and a visible ethnicity, really visible ethnicity, well then we watch, whatever group A, and we can all recognize that we're group A, well that's a perfectly good membership signal. The mere fact that we have those kinds of facial features, those kinds of color differences, that just serves as a signal, and we don't have to work at it. We don't have to do it. It just ends up serving as a signal. So those that don't have that feature, of many different kinds that don't have kinds of people that don't have those stimulus features, well, they have anti-virtue signals. Effectively, they're looked at the same way when you're not wearing a mask. You're looked at as unclean because you're choosing to not be saying, I'm not a member of your club. Well, they're going to judge you equivalently, except that in the case of ethnicity and race, you can't choose to wear the virtue signal. You can't get past that. The virtue signal just can't be put on at all because you can't fake it. And so it leads to a different kind of way of thinking about how hard it is to have suffered from racism. Because, you try to, as a person, try to wrap your head around how bad it is today versus 20 years ago versus 100 years. And of course we try, but you can't necessarily ever do it. But I think thinking it through this way sort of made it a little bit more shocking even for me thinking about it, because there's a sense, so as we talked about in a recent Science Moment, how did masks go from totally something you shouldn't wear or don't need to wear to something that are totally obviously work? And the reasons these things happen is because over time these social groups just sort of evolve certain kinds of signals, and then once they're all wearing them and it turns out to distinguish you from the other group, it serves as a membership signal, they post hoc come up with bullcrap explanations for why it's it's not only serves as a membership signal, but it's righteous in itself to have that kind of signal, to bear that kind of signal. So in the case of masks, it became a membership signal because it was clear that some people who were really pro-COVID panic were more likely to wear them, and the other side was not. And so then post hoc, they start to create all of these science explanations for why it's totally you should do. Now, same thing happens if you've got ethnic differences. One side will just, well, we already came to believe that we're the clean club by virtue of having these features, and they didn't make a decision to do it. It just ended up to being that was a signal. It showed membership within this tribe, and so it means those are not members. But what the tribe ends up doing on its own is post hoc come up with justifications for why having this kind of nose, this kind of skin color is actually better. It's not just a signal that it's part of our cool club, but no, those very signals, which in this case you can't do anything about, are post hoc justified. Well, it's better to have things like this because, and you come up with some story, And it's always, racism is filled with these stories about how folks like us, it's better to be this way because of X, Y, and Z. And it's always bullcrap, and it can be wrapped in a wrapping of pseudoscience, but it's all bullcrap. And the same thing can be for accent. They might falsely attribute the accent that somebody happens because it might correlate with ethnicity, and then they'll say, well, that accent, that's just bad English, and it's bad, and it brings society down. All of these things get wrapped up in it. But in the case of ethnicity, unlike accent, which is at least somewhat modifiable if you work at it, there is nothing you can ever do to take off the anti-virtue signal that you're born with. And these things, as we've talked about, they're a lot like blockchains, which I'll try to go into another time. Once these social narratives start and provide this kind of story that folks that are like us, whether it's ethnically or whether it's because we all share this view on the medical situation and how, whatever it might be, once this happens, it's really hard to unroll these social narratives because it's decentralized. All of the stuff has spread across the entire network. There is no central authority where you can say, here's the story, let's go change it. No, it's decentralized, just like it is in science, just like it is in all of society's networks. The gossip is in some sense spread across it, and you can't just change the narrative. So when you think about it this way, and you think about racism especially, it's bad enough dealing with the kinds of social hysteria, mass hysteria that we're dealing with for the last 2 years, and it can feel like you're in a nightmare just dealing with just complete irrationality exploding all around you, and which must be 0.1% of what it's like and what it is like if you're an ethnic minority in a racist culture, where you can never even say, okay, I'm just going to take the damn vaccine. Okay, I'm going to put the damn mask on. You can never do that. So it's just a permanent Alice in Wonderland life, and you can see the hysteria because you're just like us watching the hysteria. And the racist culture around you, they have no idea that they're being racist. They don't consider themselves racist. They're in the hysteria. So imagining what it's like for generations and generations of folks that have had to deal with this boggles the mind, frankly. And if you get it, if you start seeing it the way that I'm seeing it, I think it'll give new realism and lifeblood to the dangers of racism more generally. And that was your science moment.